A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
There's a certain thrill that comes from the idea of having a carefree night in a wildly adventurous setting, free from the judgments of the everyday world, and I had always fantasized about what it would be like to be caught in a whirlwind romance with a stranger in an exotic locale. That thought lingered in the back of my mind for years, stoked by the countless movies I consumed and the endless stories floating through my social circles. But when I finally found the courage to act on one of my fantasies, I discovered the harsh realities lurking just beneath the surface. It all started when I moved to a new city after college, where everything felt fresh and full of promise. I had just landed a new job that required frequent travel, mostly to glamorous destinations, and one night in Barcelona, after a long day of meetings, I decided to embrace the moment. The warm night air was alive with music and laughter, and I was drawn into a crowded bar pulsating with energy. There, I met him, a charismatic artist with a mischievous glint in his eye and an accent that made my knees weak. He was everything my fantasies had promised: charming, spontaneous, and utterly intoxicating. We danced under the low lights, sharing stories that wove our lives together while the world faded around us. I felt alive for the first time in ages, intoxicated not just by the sangria but by the possibility that I was shedding my mundane reality for something vibrant and exhilarating. As the night deepened, he leaned in closer, whispering promises of adventure and intimacy. I could feel the tension sparking between us, a magnetic pull that made my heart race. Finally, in a haze of desire, we left the bar together, stumbling through dimly lit streets towards the nearest hotel, our laughter echoing off the cobblestones. But as the dawn broke over the city, the fantasy began to unravel. The morning light highlighted the disarray of my choice, and the artist wasn't the smooth romantic I'd pictured. His carefree facade slipped as he started talking about his commitments, his art, and his struggles with mental health. I felt the heavy weight of reality settle over us like a thick fog. Instead of a wild escape, I found myself in a deep discussion that made me acutely aware of the fragility of our encounter. I wanted to run, but there was compassion bubbling within me, urging me to listen and be present, and I struggled with the genuine connection contrasting starkly with the idealized moment I'd envisioned. I felt a rush of panic as I realized that this whirlwind had become a wave threatening to drown me. I was falling for the man behind the fantasy, not just the figure in my dreams, and as we talked, I was faced with the choice of whether to embrace this new reality or cling to the illusion of a carefree evening. Ultimately, I chose connection over escapism. We shared our fears, dreams, and vulnerabilities, and while we parted ways at noon, exchanging hesitant smiles and promises to keep in touch, I was left contemplating the nature of my fantasy and the truth we often overlook. Reflecting on that night, I realized that sometimes fantasies are not merely about pleasure or thrill, they can reveal deeper truths about ourselves, our yearnings for connection, understanding, and shared experience. I returned home feeling both liberated and unsettled, admiring how life rarely unfolds according to our plans. I don't think I'll ever forget him or the raw authenticity of our meeting. A few months later, I received a message from him, a simple "How are you?" followed by a photo of a new painting he'd created, something he claimed was inspired by our conversation. I smiled, knowing that the reality was so much richer than the fantasy, and wondered how many others were out there, living in the shadows of their own dreams. As I reflected on that night, I felt a sense of warmth, realizing that it wasn't a nightmare but a beautiful awakening, one that taught me to cherish the imperfections that make life so compelling. The days turned into weeks, and our exchanges evolved into something more profound. Each message from him felt like a gentle ripple in the still waters of my life, nudging me awake from the humdrum routine I had settled into. We shared fragments of our worlds, documenting every laugh, every desire, and every brush of vulnerability that came alive in our conversations. I began to look forward to our nightly chats, my heart dancing at the thought of unveiling the layers of his mind, and I started weaving him into my dreams. The reality was intoxicating, contrasting sharply with the fantasies I had once indulged in, where everything was steamy and perfect, a performance crafted to delight. This was different, it was raw and authentic, filled with the potential for connection and depth rather than mere physical encounters. There was a kind of magic in the imperfections that crept into our exchanges, like when I stumbled over my words, or he shared a painting that seemed incomplete, an echo of whispers and lines that spoke loudly, but lacked the finish and polish I had envisioned. One evening, during one of our lengthy dialogues, I felt the urge to broach the subject of reality. I wanted to tread carefully, though, knowing how easily dreams can shatter under the weight of expectations. "What do you think about exploring our fantasies further?" I typed, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send. The question hanging in the digital air between us like a conversation held at a cafe, the scent of coffee and pastries wafting around us. I braced myself. Would he take it as a playful suggestion, or would he see it for what it was, a gentle nudge toward the frayed edges of reality? His reply came quicker than I anticipated, a simple "I've thought about it too. But part of me fears losing what we have." Those words echoed in my mind for days. We were treading on a precipice, hovering between the perfect fantasy we had built and the genuine connection that was blossoming. Part of me wanted to dive headfirst into the chaos of it all, to explore every nuance of our desires, to drunk press those fantasies into reality. But another part of me clung desperately to the warmth and safety of our words. What if the tangibility of our dreams bled the colors out of what was already vivid? The notion of it being a nightmare replayed in my thoughts. It was so easy to dance around the idea of passion when it was wrapped tightly in the cocoon of screens and distance. But what if, when stripped bare, the reality fell flat, an unfinished painting revealed under the hard light of day? Eventually, after scribbling tentative messages in my mind, I took a deep breath and pressed forward. What do you want to see happen? The question was a leap into the unknown, and I felt lighter yet heavier with the weight of it. I wondered if I caught a hint of hesitation in his response, a flicker of uncertainty that made my heart race and pulse thud against my chest. "I want to get to know the real you, beyond the words," he wrote, and I felt an overwhelming warmth spread within me, a craving that stretched beyond mere physicality. Weeks passed, our dialogues traversed the spectrum of feelings, ranging from innocent musings on artistic inspiration to deep dives into the intricacies of commitment. We lost ourselves in stories of past loves, future dreams, and those midnight confessions that spilled out like secrets beneath the stars. Yet, I sensed a contention hanging over us, a question we were avoiding. I could almost hear it, that whisper of destiny. What would it mean to turn this cartoonish dream of skinny dipping in a warm ocean into a picturesque illusion? And then, one rainy evening in late autumn, a soft invitation came nudging into my inbox. How about meeting in person? The proposition shimmered before me like the glow of an uncertain flame, and I found myself grinning, then quickly frowning. My heart raced, anticipation clawing at my insides. Could I step into the canvas we'd painted together, or was that the moment when everything would dissolve? I could almost see it, the fantasy stretching out like a beautiful, uncharted horizon before me, pulling me in, while simultaneously pushing me away with the heavy weight of reality. Days of contemplation curled around me like smoke, each twist and turn of thought compelling me onward until I had crafted a response that both terrified and thrilled me. Yes. It hung in my mind like a fragile spell, one word laden with promise and dread. We settled on a small art gallery nestled on the quiet outskirts of town, a space drenched in creative energy, where the paintings were lively, and the atmosphere felt ethereal, scattering the lingering doubts like scattered leaves in the wind. The day of our meeting arrived, and 1,000 butterflies danced in my stomach as I entered the gallery, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the smells of rain and warming spices. The initial thrill fluttering in my chest was marred with a thick layer of apprehension. Would we get lost in each other's eyes, or was I stepping into an awkward situation destined to slip back into the shadows? But then I saw him, standing just beneath the sprawling canvas, blue in swirls of deeper hues that echoed the depths of my mind. Our eyes met, and the world faded into a quiet hum. The moment was surreal, bursting with an intensity I had not anticipated. We spent those hours enveloped in conversation, laughter echoing in the small space. I shared thoughts on art, he chuckled at my nervous stumbles, and for every word we exchanged, I felt the invisible thread tying us draw tighter. We painted a new story together, one that was only beginning to emerge from the canvas of our dreams, no longer constrained by the pixels that had connected us. When our hands brushed, I felt warm currents of electricity. It was clear that we were both aware of the tightrope we walked above an abyss of uncertainty, but the magic of the moment kept us tethered. As the evening wound down and twilight seeped into the gallery, we stepped outside, the world outside appearing softer, illuminated under the gentle glow of street lamps. A wave of real, tangible affection washed over me, fueling the moment with a quiet, electrifying promise. There was no fantasy tearing at the seams, no crumbling reality demanding attention. Just two people taking a chance, creating a story marked not by the typical markers of romance or lust, but by the foundations of honesty and friendship. Months later, I lay in bed, replaying the memories of his laughter and our first meaningful kiss, still enveloped in the sweetness of that night. What could have easily devolved into a nightmare instead turned into the core of a thriving journey, one that transformed our shared dreams into a fragile reality, delicate yet beautiful. With every shared moment and vulnerability, we crafted a version of ourselves that was, and always would be, infinitely richer than anything I had found before, reminding me that sometimes it's the unpredictable chaos of life that blooms into the kind of connection we often yearn for in our fantasies. And as I drifted off to sleep, I allowed the bittersweet wonder of it all to embrace me. In the quiet chambers of my mind, shadows of the past faded, replaced with the whispers of dreams yet to be realized, knowing fully that those fantasies, when touched by honesty, could morph into something stunningly, satisfyingly real. That night marked a turning point in my life, each thought spiraling gracefully into the next as I imagined the small changes I could embrace. I often found myself daydreaming about our conversation, the flow of ideas, the laughter interwoven with vulnerability. It became a tapestry of emotions that I would revisit on quiet evenings when the world outside dimmed into a soft glow. I replayed his words, the way he spoke about art and humanity, folding my own little insecurities into the fabric of our connection, feeling a sense of permission to embrace my chaotic self. Days turned into weeks, and it astonished me how something so serendipitous could linger like the taste of a fine wine, warm and intoxicating. Every text he sent painted another layer in my mind, a canvas I didn't know I had, each exchange revealing the raw essence of two souls entangled in shared dreams. I began to see my life differently. Instead of the linear paths I had always walked, I found myself wandering into serendipitous alleys of adventure and self-discovery. Then, one evening, as rain drizzled softly against my window panes, my phone buzzed with a familiar rhythm. It was him again, this time asking if I'd like to see his latest exhibit, a showcase he had planned for months in a quaint gallery downtown. My heart raced at the thought. Compared to the previous vague illusions of intimacy through our screens, this was a real-world challenge, a shift from fantasy to reality, a chance to interact beyond the confines of our carefully curated words. I hesitated, nervous about stepping out of my comfort zone. What if we encountered the rawness of existence that often lay beyond the realm of our beautiful exchanges? What if it didn't measure up, shattering the soft cocoon we had spun around each other? But the allure of authenticity won the battle within, and I found myself standing before the gallery a few days later, curiosity blooming inside me as I entered the softly lit space. Colors danced on the walls, each painting embodying a story I hadn't lived, but could feel resonating deep within my heart. And there he was, standing proud amidst his canvases, a mix of nervousness and passion radiating from him like a beacon. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, the world around us faded. It was just the two of us, our connection flourishing amidst the strokes of paint and splashes of color. As we navigated through his works, he explained the inspiration behind each piece, his passion electric. I shared my thoughts too, hesitant but emboldened by the beauty around us and the contrast of our conversations that had now grown into something palpable. Yet, amidst the joy of discovery, I noticed a peculiar unease creeping in, a recognition of the thin line we were treading between fantasy and our very real lives. Suddenly, the idealistic images I had conjured up began to waver, revealing the intricacies of human connection that were not always as simple as they appeared in my dreams. It happened during a soft, spontaneous laugh shared over one of his more abstract pieces, which to me seemed chaotic and whimsical, yet to him symbolized the emotional wreckage of lost love and anger. In that moment, the laughter curdled slightly, revealing glimpses of his real-world complexity. As he bore his soul, shadows flickered in his eyes, hints of struggles and disappointments that his art had masked until now. The fantasy I had wrapped around him of the flawless artist who could lead me into a world painted with sunshine, began to reveal a semblance of darkness that mirrored my own. Feeling a rush of vulnerability, I opened up too, speaking of my own tribulations, the tightrope of expectations holding me hostage in my own life. As the evening unfolded, the layers of our conversations peeled back, leaving room for honesty but also a sense of hesitance, an unsteady dance of vulnerability that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Our connection deepened that night but was underscored by the ever-present reminder of our fears and insecurities, that perhaps the very beauty we sought was intertwined with the truths we often shied away from. And finally, as we exited the gallery, the gentle rain had morphed into a light drizzle, cascading down like whispered confessions. Walking side by side without a clear destination, I realized it was okay to embrace the unknown, finding solace in the warmth of his presence. The night felt alive, charged with the potential for shared dreams but also the weight of reality pressing down on us. As we reached a quiet park, the moonlight spilled across the grass, illuminating a space where we could stand still for a moment, allowing the hum of the city to fade into the background. I turned to look at him, and in the silent exchange, I understood. The beauty of our connection was not in the idealized fantasies we had conjured, but in the intricacies, the messiness of our truths intertwined. This wasn't a neatly wrapped story, it was still unfolding, an exquisite blend of highs and lows living in the breath between our words. As I lay in bed that night, the echoes of our conversation lingered, a tapestry woven from threads of joy, fear, longing, and relief. No longer was I drifting off to sleep solely wrapped in thoughts of unrealized fantasies. Instead, I was cradled by the promise of an authentic journey ahead, one where nightmares didn't hold dominion over my dreams. In that acceptance, amidst the cacophony of life's beautiful chaos, I felt free. The stars outside shone brightly, as if nodding along to my revelations, and I surrendered to sleep, secure in the knowledge that every moment was a brushstroke on the canvas of my life, exactly as it was meant to be. When I first slid into the driver's seat of my Tesla, it felt like the dawn of a new era, not just for me but for how I viewed modern life and technology. I remember the tingling thrill of excitement, the way the soft hum of the electric engine promised a future unshackled from the noise and pollution of the past. My friends ridiculed me then, calling me a tech nerd and mocking my decision to invest in a glorified computer on wheels, but I brushed it off, intoxicated by the sleek design and the allure of sustainability. Over the months, my affinity for the car deepened. I loved the dopamine rush of the instant torque when I pressed the accelerator, the way I could summon my voice assistant to conjure up music, directions, or even a bit of levity from the mundane daily commute. However, everything changed one autumn afternoon when my routine drive home was suddenly interrupted by an unsettling event. Just as I was merging onto the highway, another driver flashed their headlights, gesturing frantically as they maneuvered around me. Confused, I peered into my rearview mirror and saw a family in an old minivan, clearly in distress. My therapy dog, Barkley, who sat beside me with his head resting lazily on my arm, seemed to sense the tension. I slowed down, pulling to the shoulder of the road, my heart racing with a combination of anxiety and curiosity. As I stepped out, the chill of the evening air hit me and I felt the weight of judgment from passing cars, all of them seemingly aware of this strange, spontaneous moment unfolding. The family rushed out of their minivan, a woman in a white blouse and a man with an ashen face, clutching a small child who appeared to be choking. In an instant, every part of me screamed to help. My heart raced as I recalled my first aid training from years ago. With an urgency that drowned my fear, I rushed toward them, my Tesla's sleek lines glimmering in the afternoon sun, a beacon of both technology and newfound responsibility. After a chaotic few minutes, punctuated by the sounds of desperation and gasps for breath, I managed to assist the child, urging them to cough and finally releasing a small object that had lodged in their throat. Relief washed over the family, whose tears now reflected gratitude rather than panic. I could feel their weight lift just as I felt my own pulse calming in the aftershocks of the dangerous moment. But as I turned to return to my car, a thought crept into my mind, knitting itself with fear. Would they see me as just some tech-savvy guy with a fancy car, not a hero, but merely a pawn of materialism? The fear lingered, reminding me of the conversations about the elitism often associated with electric vehicles. I climbed back into my Tesla, feeling not just drained but a little ashamed, questioning the world I inhabited and whether I'd ever truly been one of them, the nice people who drove simple cars, lived simple lives, and were genuinely a part of the community. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection as I pulled up online to a popular subreddit, r/askreddit. I composed a post that translated my turmoil into words, articulating both my pride in my car and my concerns about how it could segregate me from others. After hitting post, I let the debate swirl in my mind while I lay in bed, the glow of my screen illuminating the somber shadows of my room. The responses came flooding in, many sympathized with my plight while others dismissed my feelings as trivial, mere echoes of guilt for disdainful wealth. The engagement tugged on my emotions. Some commenters shared similar experiences, while others recounted how their Teslas had become a symbol of status, painting a picture that was both vibrant and troubling. For the next few weeks, I grappled with the dichotomy between my love for the car and the vision of an isolated future it might represent. It wasn't until an opportunity arose, a local charity organizing an event for underprivileged youth where the community could discuss electric vehicles and how they could benefit everyone, that the fog of confusion began to dissipate. I offered to bring my Tesla, eager to share what drew me to it while also encouraging accessibility and understanding, hoping to bridge that gap I felt separating me from others. And there it was, as kids climbed in and excitedly pushed buttons, their faces lighting up with joy, I witnessed something revealing and profound. It wasn't about the material, it was about sharing experiences, laughter, and connection. As I left the event that evening, the smile on my face mirrored the sunset, a mix of relief and budding hope. I understood then that it wasn't the car that defined me, but the choices I made with it that could reshape my relationship with my community. As for my post on Reddit, I returned to it to share my experience and reflect on how it transformed my initial feelings of isolation into connection. The thread had blossomed with a variety of stories, some filled with heartwarming outcomes, others serving as a reminder that within the vastly sprawling universe of technology, it's our shared humanity that ultimately matters. I realized that despite my car's sleekness and the status it might convey, it was just a vehicle, both literally and metaphorically, for deeper connections, and as the day faded into night, the hum of the electric engine became a melody of promise, one that I eagerly continued to explore with an open heart and mind. As I drove home under the blanket of twilight, the blue glow of the dashboard illuminated my face, casting soft shadows that danced to the hum of the electric motor. I couldn't help but think of all the interactions I had that day, the threads weaving together a tapestry of shared experiences. The stories I had read and those I had bravely shared of my own made me realize that there was more to owning a Tesla than the sleek, cutting-edge technology or the environmental consciousness it represented. It was about the connections I was forging, each encounter igniting a spark of camaraderie that I had previously thought impossible within the isolating confines of technology. I had initially approached the announcement of the salute with a twinge of apprehension. The idea of gathering with hundreds of fellow owners and waving at strangers felt oddly intimidating. Yet, as I parked my car alongside a sea of gleaming Teslas, I felt an unexpected thrill of belonging. Strangers exchanged knowing smiles and nods, acknowledgement of a shared choice that seemed almost sacred. When we all raised our arms in a salute, I felt a swell of joy unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was as if, for just a moment, we transcended the labels we often wore in the wider world, parent, worker, neighbor, and became simply Tesla owners, a tribe bound by our decision to embrace a different future. As I navigated the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that last evening's gathering had awakened something profound within me. An urge to connect further, to not just speak about my car but to dip my toes into interpersonal relationships, the kind that thrive outside of a screen. I might have started as a lonely owner with ethereal goals of sustainability, but now I felt equipped to invite others into my life, if only for a brief coffee or a chat about shared journeys. I parked my Tesla in the garage, still reverberating with the energy of the day, and could almost hear the echoes of laughter and stories traded among friends. I picked up my phone, and for the first time, I didn't see it as an intrusive device but rather as a window to my next potential connection. Scrolling through the recent threads, I stumbled upon a post asking for recommendations for local meetups for Tesla owners. A small grin tugged at my lips, and within moments I had commented with my interest and an invitation for a casual coffee outing at a nearby cafe. My heart raced at the thought of opening my life a little wider, allowing new friendships to blossom, just like the evening's salutes had ignited camaraderie among us stranger drivers. That night, the potential of connection sparked hope within me, a realization that, perhaps, the salute was not merely a gesture but a beacon guiding me toward a community I hadn't known I craved. I happily fell asleep, dreaming not of electric highways or future innovations, but of the laughter I might soon share with newfound companions, each one fueling the promise of tomorrow's conversations. Update: a week later, I found myself sitting in that very cafe, surrounded by the soft murmur of laughter and conversations just like the ones I'd read about. Each person brought their own story. One had converted their garage into a workshop for DIY electric projects, another was an artist who used solar panels for her studio. As I laughed and shared my own experiences, I realized that each individual's narrative intertwined with mine, forming an unbreakable bond. My Tesla, it turned out, had become more than just a mode of transport, it had become the vessel that carried me toward genuine human connection. I understood now that it wasn't just about the type of car I owned, it was about the paths that unfolded from that ownership, paths leading to friendship, laughter, and the kind of warmth that can only come from moments spent in shared company. The threads we create around us, stitched together by our hopes and shared experiences, are what truly drive us forward, electric or not. And in that bubbling cafe, amid conversations that sparked and flew through the air, I felt anchored and finally at home. As I sat there, nursing my lukewarm coffee and watching the world outside the large windows of the cafe, I couldn't help but be captivated by the sight of families and friends drifting in and out, their laughter mingling with the notes of a gentle piano that seemed to fill the air with warmth. Each car that passed, along with their unique stories and journeys, reminded me of the conversations I had shared online, the kind that made me realize being a Tesla owner was less about the car itself and more about the community it unwittingly introduced me to. Turning my gaze back to the table, I noticed my phone buzz softly, drawing me back into the digital space that had sparked all this. It was a response to my thread. A fellow Tesla owner, Sarah, had shared a particularly poignant story about the emotional journey she underwent after she lost her job. She had taken solace in her daily drives, using her vehicle as a place to contemplate and process her feelings. Inspired by her bravery, I typed back, sharing my own transition from feeling isolated to finding solace in shared experiences, and how the little gatherings had transformed me from a passive commuter to an active participant in my own life. With every keystroke, I could feel the connection strengthening. It was almost palpable, like an electric charge bridging the distance between us. As the cafe lights dimmed, an inviting glow filled the room, and the conversations faded into a soft murmur around me, I suddenly thought of hosting a small gathering of my own. With a tentative excitement swelling within, I imagined a place where the stories of Tesla owners could come together, in the backyard of my own home, perhaps, surrounded by flickering fairy lights and warm fires where we could share not just our car anecdotes but also our lives. I pictured each person arriving, laughter spilling into the night, each tale weaving into a rich tapestry of our collective experiences, the feeling of community blossoming into something beautifully tangible. That evening, I left the cafe with a spark ignited in my heart, an urge to connect, communicate, and transform my newfound realizations into tangible experiences. At home, I jotted down a list of ideas, snacks, drinks, even a few fun games, or perhaps a shared playlist that could have our glowing electric engines humming along in harmony. And as the night carried on, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. The fear of vulnerability I once harbored began to dissolve, leaving behind only the thrilling possibility of what was to come. Fast forward a few weeks, as I prepared my backyard for the first gathering, I marveled at how a simple thread on Reddit had woven this entire experience together. Friends and acquaintances filled my yard, each with stories to share, shedding light on their journeys, from professional triumphs to personal challenges, all the while embracing the very same car that had once made me feel so isolated. Sitting there with a drink in hand, I looked around at familiar faces and new friends, the barriers that once made me hesitant now replaced with an understanding born from the shared experience of our rides. I recognized then that my own initial visions of yearning for admiration or status had faded into deeper connections that fed my soul, friendships that pulsated with the heartbeats of authenticity and trust. As the evening air wrapped around us, filled with the warmth of conversation, laughter, and the scent of grilled food wafting into the night, the realization struck me again. It wasn't just a sleek, silent car in the driveway but a vessel guiding me towards an incredible community of souls. In the laughter shared and stories exchanged, I learned that perhaps the journey we embark on isn't solely about the destination or the vehicle we drive, it's about where we choose to steer our lives, recognizing that the true power lies not in the electric hum of technology, but in the profound connections we cultivate with one another as we traverse this beautiful, chaotic road together. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I found a serenity in that moment, a newfound understanding of my place in the world, and I smiled softly, eager for the adventures, both on the road and within this remarkable community, that lay ahead. When I was a teenager, working as a stock boy in a grocery store, I developed a peculiar hobby that I never intended to harm anyone with. I used to reprice steaks. It all started innocently enough. My high school friends and I would joke about how overpriced certain items were in our local grocery store. We'd laugh about how we could probably be better at pricing. One evening, fueled by boredom and a mischievous spirit, I decided to sneak into the meat department after the store closed and put our theory to the test. I was the only one there, and with the store's dim lights casting long shadows across the cold display cases, I felt like I had stepped into my own secret world. I could see the steaks gleaming under their faux candlelight, glistening with a sheen that almost felt mesmerizing. I unscrewed the pricing gun, carefully, so as not to draw attention, and began to covertly reduce the prices, shifting them from gourmet cuts to those affordable enough for students like me. There was an electric thrill in my veins as I imagined my friends coming to the store and snagging an exquisite steak dinner for a fraction of the price. I justified it to myself then, thinking it was just harmless fun, a way to give a gift to anyone who came by and decided to treat themselves. However, my spree didn't go unnoticed for long. The next day, I overheard two older women discussing the inexplicably low prices of steaks. They were ecstatic, almost giddy, chatting about how they could now afford to throw a lovely family barbecue without breaking the bank. I felt a warm swell of satisfaction, but a knot also twisted in my stomach. Was I really helping them, or was I undermining the store's livelihood? I began to feel like a puppet master, pulling the strings of the unsuspecting customers and my own moral compass. The management soon caught wind of the pricing irregularities, and I had to watch my back, terrified that they'd uncover my little game. There was a tension crackling in the air every time I worked that week as I navigated the aisles with a mix of fear and thrill. I felt caught in an ever-tightening web. I couldn't just spring the truth on my boss or colleagues, they'd think I was nothing more than a troublemaker. As the days rolled into nights, I came to a crossroads when a regular customer, an elderly man who frequented the store every Tuesday, approached me. He had become a source of comfort, always cheerful and never without a story about his grandkids. "Imagine my luck," he said with a toothy grin as he shared how he scored a fantastic deal on steaks last week. His joyful excitement hit me like a wave, and for a fleeting moment, I felt all the guilt wash away. But that feeling was temporary. I realized I was only postponing the inevitable. It dawned on me that I couldn't keep this charade going forever. The stakes, quite literally, were too high. I made a decision that rendered my excitement moot and broke the cycle of what I had started. One night before closing, I took a deep breath and confessed everything to my manager in the dim light of the employee break room. To my surprise, she listened with an understanding that made me see her in a new light. Instead of anger, I found compassion reflected in her eyes. She wasn't happy with what I'd done, but as a mother herself, she sensed my youthful recklessness rather than malice. It turned into a candid conversation about ethics, the challenges of growing up, and the meaning of responsibility. While I didn't lose my job, I learned that sometimes, even when we think we're helping someone, our choices can lead to unintended consequences. The next day, the prices returned to normal, and while the customers lamented the return to regular pricing, I felt a burden lift off my shoulders. It was a bittersweet end to a thrilling adventure, but I realized it wasn't just about the stakes, it was about finding my way through the murky waters of teenage mischief and growing up. Reflecting on that time now, I understand that my confession didn't just alleviate the panic but allowed me to foster a deeper character and apply the lesson to my life beyond the grocery store. I sometimes wonder if that kind, elderly man still enjoys his Tuesday trips, blissfully unaware of the excitement and chaos behind those priced cuts of meat, perhaps imagining how his barbecue will taste just as sweet. And that, I tell myself, is the true delight of a story well lived. Update: a few weeks later, I ran into the elderly man in a different store. He did not recognize me, but he thanked me for helping him find those amazing steak deals when he usually had a limited budget. I smiled and felt a strange sense of pride. It turns out my little escapade did lead to joy, seemingly with no strings attached after all, reminding me that sometimes the path to maturity is littered with odd little experiences that shape our hearts in unexpected ways. I'm not proud of my teenage antics, but I'm thankful for the lesson learned in the most unconventional of ways. As I reflected on that day in the grocery store, the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across my living room, and I realized just how much I had grown since my mischievous teenage years. I remember the thrill of the secret I had kept, the shifts I made to those price tags back when I worked at the butcher shop. At 17, I was so eager to make a mark in my small world, forging an identity that felt just out of reach. I had been a restless kid, glued to my phone, scrolling through social media feeds, and craving the excitement of something, anything, beyond the humdrum rhythm of local life. Those overpriced steaks called to me every Friday afternoon, gleaming under the fluorescent lights while my coworkers packed up to head home. The thrill of repricing them, slashing the tags with my careful hand, launched an adrenaline rush I could never replicate in class or on the field. I told myself it was harmless, after all, who wouldn't want a nice steak at a discount, especially an old man living on a fixed income? Yet, even in that very motivation, a flicker of guilt would gnaw at me. That guilt sometimes split my heart right in half like the steaks I altered, torn between the joy I hoped to deliver and the deceptive nature of my actions. It became a ritual of sorts. I would wait until the store quieted down and the management was oblivious, and I didn't think too deeply about the potential consequences. I wrapped my ethos around goodwill but never pondered the ethics. It always felt like a game to me, one in which I was both the hero and the villain. Years passed, and I oftentimes found myself revisiting those days with a mix of nostalgia and regret. I learned, through life's many winding paths, that integrity often comes with a cost, but during that phase, I was naive enough to believe I could weave my unearned kindness without consequence. That encounter with the elderly man was perhaps the crowning moment of my youthful rebellion. His gratitude struck a chord, yet it struck with a note of irony I'd never properly understood until much later. Did I really help him, or did I simply play God with the price of his dinner? I realized then that my actions extended beyond the immediate thrill. They rippled into someone else's life, entangling futures in my juvenile antics. As I sat on my couch, enveloped in the comforts of adulthood, I now saw the fallacy in my arrogance. The age-old wisdom that morality is rarely black and white began to unfurl gently within me. What remained was an uncertain peace, for in that moment, the world felt both heavy and light, and my journey from teenage mischief to responsible adult was long, like an unspooled thread of a forgotten tapestry. I couldn't shake the disquieting thought of what might have happened had my actions come to light. What if I had been caught? My mind spiraled sometimes, and the what-ifs danced like elusive shadows. My heart grieved for the youth who thought they were invincible, playing the game of life without fully grasping the rules. But there was victory in the realization that life itself, with all its layers, had soothed those wounds. It taught me compassion and integrity, lessons wrapped in odd encounters and the embrace of unexpected outcomes. So, I planted those memories like seeds in my mind, each one reminding me of the vibrancy of human connections, the complexities of our choices, and a quiet understanding that I was no longer that reckless teenager anymore, but rather someone who learned that empathy matters more than winning fleeting battles. Life has a way of nudging us along, having us question ourselves, and thankfully, I had emerged with a heart just a little wiser. If nothing else, I could offer my newfound reflections to those who might still be on their own journeys, encouragement to tread carefully on paths that seem harmless at first glance. As I made my dinner that evening, I marinated the chicken with thoughtful intention and pulled out the lovely vegetables I had picked up from the farmer's market. I let the flavors meld together, reflecting on the importance of good choices. I smiled, realizing that life, much like cooking, required the right ingredients. And through it all, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the lessons learned but also for the chance to shape my own path as a more mindful steward of that delicate balance between kindness and integrity. As I sat down to enjoy my meal, the evening light softening the edges of my thoughts, I knew I was at peace with my past, and more importantly, with myself. As I savored each bite, the flavors swirling around my palate, I found myself lost in thought, reflecting on how much had changed since those early days of secretly repricing steaks. The kitchen around me was alive with the crackling of the frying pan and the gentle simmer of a sauce at the back. My once reckless teenage antics felt like pages from a worn-out storybook, a narrative I'd grown out of yet still cherished for the lessons tucked within. The golden light streaming through the window wrapped around me like a cozy blanket, comforting and warm, reminding me how far I had come. I recalled the faces of the people I had impacted during my odd little phase, those blank-slated customers wandering the meat aisle, oblivious to my subtle manipulations yet entirely transformed in their experiences. The thrill of the chase had faded, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. Each time I heard the swish of plastic over the cold, metallic surfaces of our store's shelves, I thought of how I could use those once mischievous instincts to make a genuine difference in people's lives. After my meal, I tidied up the kitchen, putting away what remained of my ingredients. With every clink of the dishes, the simmering thoughts of my past diverged into a quiet acknowledgement of my present fidelity to kindness and integrity. I realized that, just like cooking, life wasn't always about the end result, it was about the process, the choices made along the way, and how those choices rippled through the lives of others. The elderly man's gratitude lingered in my mind like the fragrant herbs lingering in the air. It became clear to me that those small acts, even ones born from misguided intentions, could lead to something beautiful if taken at face value. As dusk settled outside and the sky deepened into a calm indigo dotted with glinting stars, I thought it might be time to reconnect with the world beyond my cozy kitchen. My phone buzzed with a notification, a reminder that there was a community dinner at the local community center that evening. Initially hesitant, I realized that this was the type of gathering I could attend without any speck lingering in my conscience. It was an opportunity to be part of something bigger, a chance to continue my journey of contributing positively to others. Tossing aside my nerves like a forgotten apron, I donned a light jacket, grabbed a small dish I'd prepared for the occasion, and headed out into the cool night air. The community center buzzed with activity, laughter intertwined with the tantalizing aromas wafting through the air. As I set my dish on the communal table, I struck up conversations with neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, sharing stories, and learning about the journeys that had woven us all into this fabric of community. In those moments, I felt a sense of connection I hadn't experienced in a long while. It was refreshing and grounding, like fresh basil in a pot of simmering sauce. It ignited the senses and reminded me that life thrived in its most authentic moments, unplanned, unedited, and authentically shared. As the evening unfolded, I helped clean up and interacted with new friends, slowly beginning to understand the value of trust and responsibility, not just for oneself but for the entire community. My heart swelled with warmth as I felt the genuine camaraderie wrap around me. That night, I left the center feeling elevated, knowing I'd grown from the seeds of my past. Reflecting on the journey that had led me there, from the not-so-bright choices of teenage mischief to a newfound appreciation for integrity and kindness, offered me profound satisfaction. I embraced the serene wisdom of the present, realizing that while my past had its shadows, it also served as the foundation for this illuminating chapter in my life. I'd exchanged one path for another, moving beyond the thrill of manipulation to the joy of connection, and honestly, that felt far more gratifying. As I lay in bed that night, a gentle sense of peace wrapped around me, like a down comforter against a chilly evening. Life had a way of bringing lessons when least expected and showing that even the most unconventional beginnings could lead to a flourishing journey. I drifted into a deep, content sleep, knowing that tomorrow was a new canvas waiting to be painted, not just for myself, but for everyone whose lives I hope to touch. In a world that sometimes feels strained by the clamor of differing tongues, I found myself at the center of a linguistic tug-of-war with my husband, Tom. I've always had a deep passion for the German language. It had been a part of my life since I was a child, nurtured by bedtime stories my grandmother would tell me in her lilting accent. When Tom and I met in college, I was amazed at how he soaked in those stories too, admiring my enthusiasm for a culture that seemed so distant to him, an American born and bred. Over the years, that admiration blossomed into love, but in the intimacy of our shared life, our once attractive differences began to fray at the edges. Tom studied German diligently for a while but soon found the nuances overwhelming, preferring to converse in the simple, comforting rhythms of English. But I loved to practice my German, and as the months slipped into years, it became my default language, a habitual comfort zone that I didn't realize was isolating him. One quiet evening after dinner, the familiar dance of our conversation took an unexpected turn when he asked me, gently but firmly, if I could refrain from speaking German at home as it sometimes made him feel excluded. The request struck me deeply. It felt like a rejection of a part of who I was, yet his eyes had that vulnerable glint that said he was struggling with his own feelings too. I was torn. Should I honor his request, sacrificing my linguistic flair for the sake of his comfort, or could I, in good conscience, continue speaking German, even if it meant detracting from our shared space? My thoughts churned that night, the shadows of self-doubt creeping in, mimicking our sad quiet as we ended the day. Was I the asshole for wanting to indulge in something that was such a part of me, or was I merely turning my back on a plea from the heart? Days turned into a strange dance of half-phrases in English and attempts at German that felt like a betrayal to the warmth and fluidity I thrived in. I saw flashes of disappointment in Tom's eyes each time I caught myself slipping back into my cherished words. It was an unnerving cycle. Each apology towards him felt like another nail in my own heart. The bright candlelight of our evenings dimmed, booths in our favorite restaurants filled with the silence of unspoken grievances. It wasn't until a particularly stormy night that we truly cracked open the chasm between us. Sitting in our living room, rain like a relentless drum on the roof, I finally laid bare my emotions. I told him how important it was for me to retain that part of my personality, that had felt as intrinsic to my being as breathing. And there in that cozy, rain-soaked space, our hearts opened wide, he admitted that while he loved me and admired my passion, he sometimes felt like he was on the outside looking in. It was a powerful exchange, raw and painful, but it was illuminated by an understanding that only deepened our bond. We spoke until the rain slowed, weaving through layers of our emotions, fears, and desires. By the end, we found a middle ground. We agreed that I could speak German during specific times, perhaps in moments of playfulness or passion, while committing to using English for our everyday conversations. It was a compromise born out of respect and love, a promise to nurture both my passion and his feelings. Months later, wrapped in the warmth of our love and mutual respect, I found joy in the sounds of both languages echoing through our home. I realized that love, like language, is best expressed in fluidity and understanding. We created our own little world, embracing a balance that felt harmonious, a beautiful cacophony of English conversation sprinkled with delightful German whispers. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, I catch Tom grinning when I slip into German to narrate a mundane event. It's a reassuring reminder that rather than diminishing our connection, my passion is woven seamlessly into our shared rhythm. It brings us closer, sparking late-night discussions about culture and identity, far more intimate than a mere exchange of words. As for my own internal conflict, it reshaped me into a partner who learned the beauty of compromise, whose heart echoes with gratitude for the understanding we carved from our differences. And on particularly slow afternoons, we sometimes find ourselves curled up with a book of German fairy tales, and for just a moment, the language that brought me to life becomes a bridge we walk hand in hand upon. However, our peaceful coexistence faced an unexpected challenge that I hadn't seen coming. And it started rather innocuously, with a flurry of messages from a close friend who was traveling to Germany. She was sending me pictures of charming villages, bustling markets, and the kind of enchanting landscapes that always called to my adventurous spirit. Each image ignited a longing within me, stirring the remnants of my passion for the language and culture as if I were being beckoned back to my roots. I found myself daydreaming about walking among the timber-framed houses of Rothenburg ob der Tauber, sipping coffee in a quaint café while laboriously picking apart the intricacies of my beloved language. With each ecstatic message I shared with my husband, Oliver, I ventured deeper into my reminiscing. But then a thought began to fester like a shadow in the back of my mind. I was slipping away from our shared language, and would that not create a rift again? In a moment that felt like a culmination of tension, I set my phone down and took a deep breath, deciding to tell him. One evening, while we prepared dinner, I casually mentioned how much I missed speaking German fluently. As I said those words, I felt the sparks that often flew between us dim just slightly. He cleared his throat, his back turned to me as the garlic sizzled in the pan. "You know it's hard for me when you speak that way," he replied softly, the uncharacteristic strain in his voice tinging my excitement with remorse. I felt the warmth of the kitchen wrap around us, but a chill crept into my heart. I could see where this was headed. I was about to dance on the edges of our previous discussions, tiptoeing around old insecurities. My mind raced as I weighed the prospect of expressing my desire against the well-worn caution of his sensitivity toward my enthusiasm. In his eyes, my love for the language sometimes felt like a conflation of identities, a risk that threatened to dilute the bond we had carefully rebuilt. It was never that he didn't appreciate the beauty of it, he just felt far removed from it, as if it were a melodious tune he couldn't fully hear. I offered a kind smile and said, "How about we practice together? Just a little? It might help us connect even more." For a moment, his shoulders dropped as if a weight had been lifted, and then that familiar tension began to creep back. "I don't want to feel left out," he said, a hint of defeat in his voice. It cut deep. I had unknowingly placed him into a familiar corner, a place that meant both of us retreading an old, risky narrative. Yet, this time, I saw an opportunity. Instead of focusing on our differences, I could bring him into my passion rather than pushing him away from it. I let silence envelop us, letting his thoughts swirl in the still air of the kitchen, and when it felt right, I proposed a solution. What if I spoke as fluently as I wanted, but also shared the meaning? I could help bridge the language too, like I did before. We could find a balance. Slowly, I watched as his frown morphed into thoughtfulness. "You truly want to bring me with you, don't you?" he asked with a cautious smile. "I do," I affirmed, the sincerity ringing in my heart, resonating through the air like the faint echo of a bell. Over the next few months, we began a new chapter together, one marked by our evenings spent in our cozy living room, dictionaries and notes sprawled around us, laughter punctuating the soft hum of our conversations. I shared with Oliver the stories behind the words, the richness of expressions and idioms that had once captivated me. I watched as his eyes lit up when unraveling the humor of a joke in German or realizing the affection imbued in a simple phrase. We even began to weave our private language, a blend of English and German that was uniquely ours. But with each passing week, our discussions deepened. The language, once a bridge and then a wall, transformed into a tapestry that enveloped us in colors of understanding. We talked about identity, culture, and our values, each thread strengthening the bond we had constructed over our differences. We shared our fears, Oliver expressing the insecurities of feeling linguistically inadequate, while I confessed my worries of losing touch with my heritage. And in those moments, the air filled with a shared understanding that surpassed words. Months later, as I nestled into the warmth of our oversized couch one rainy evening, surrounded by books and a steaming cup of herbal tea, it struck me how beautifully we had rebuilt our connection. The gray clouds draped outside, yet inside, it felt eternally sunlit with warmth and understanding. With my skin tingling from the memories of our journey, I decided to share our progress in a post on a Reddit community that focused on relationships. I titled my thread "A myth asshole wibta if I only spoke German to my husband despite him requesting I don't." But as I typed, it felt less like a plea for validation and more a celebration of a love that had transcended language barriers. Lastly, I fondly recounted our journey, the blending of cultures, how we found our rhythm again, and I concluded with a question to the community. Have you found harmony in your differences? As I posted it, a sense of relief washed over me. I had made it through a tumultuous chapter, and now we stood, hand in hand, ready to explore the landscapes of our vibrant, shared life together. Soon after, I received a wave of supportive and insightful replies, many expressing similar experiences, which encouraged me further. Later that night, As I drifted off to sleep, I looked over at Oliver, his peaceful face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through our window. I realized anew that love, much like language, is a journey, not a destination. Each step we took together unveiled not just the beauty in our differences, but also the harmony that lay within, patiently waiting to be discovered. As the soft glow of dawn began to fill our bedroom, I stirred awake to find Oliver already up, immersed in his morning ritual of brewing coffee. The rich aroma seeped through the air, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts. I watched him from the comfort of our rumpled bed, the way the sun kissed his tousled hair, and felt a swell of affection. This was our life, a gentle dance of routine and spontaneity. But underneath the surface, excitement tinged with a sense of trepidation lingered. Today marked the beginning of my exploration into joining a local German conversation group. After my post online, a number of people had urged me to enhance my language skills further, not just for my own fulfillment but for the bridge it could build between Oliver and me. I knew he wanted me to improve my English as well, and while he supported my passion, there was still a mutual understanding hovering between us that needed to be navigated carefully. The group met in a cozy cafe downtown, where laughter mingled with the sounds of clinking cups and the soft whir of the espresso machine. As I stepped inside, the chatter seemed to swallow me whole. I spotted a table filled with fellow language adventurers, each with a story and a shared commitment to embracing a new tongue. With a nervous smile, I slid into an empty chair, the warmth of the gathering slowly enveloping me. Conversations took flight as we practiced phrases, stuttered over difficult pronunciations, and stumbled through the occasional awkward silence, laughter breaking the tension. I felt a spark of something familiar igniting within me, an eagerness to embrace the nuances. It was exhilarating, yet I couldn't shake the thought of Oliver, wondering if he would feel left out or if he was simply letting me fly on this new adventure. That evening, as we settled back into our routine, I couldn't help but share my excitement with Oliver. His face lit up with a genuine smile, yet beneath the enthusiasm, I sensed a flicker of apprehension. "It sounds amazing, actually," he said, pausing as if weighing his words carefully. "But promise me you'll still speak with me in English when we're home. I want you to feel free to express yourself with me fully." His earnest gaze met mine, sincerity draping each syllable in warmth. As I nodded, I could feel the weight of our unspoken understanding, a desire to balance my passion with the importance of our connection. However, the next few days were an exercise in self-discipline and compromise. I found myself wanting to slip into German more often, the phrases just at the tip of my tongue, eager to dance into the spaces we shared. But in doing so, I sometimes caught a glimpse of Oliver's discomfort, the furrowed brow when he couldn't follow my excitement, the brief silence when I spoke a sentence too rapid in my newfound confidence. This tug-of-war between my zeal and his request started to weigh on my heart. Were the walls I erected to protect my love inadvertently turning impenetrable? After a particularly frustrating attempt at explaining a simple story in German to him, resulting in more confusion than connection, I felt a rush of guilt clawing at my insides. I walked to the window, looking out at the twilight blending into night, the world outside a tapestry of muted colors. It struck me then how language, glorious as it could be, was a tool meant for connection, not division. Perhaps I had let my excitement overshadow the core of our relationship, and a wave of remorse flooded over me as I thought of our conversations where he patiently navigated between my two languages. That night, I made a decision. I turned to Oliver, who was curled up with a book of his own, and took a deep breath. "How about we create space for both?" I suggested softly, and he glanced up, surprise flickering across his features. "Let's set aside specific times for German. And when you're tired or lost, I'll be right here, ready to help you navigate back to English. Let's learn together." His eyes shone with a mix of understanding and relief as a smile broke across his face. In the following weeks, we embraced this newfound rhythm. Each night, we dipped into German for a little while, navigating through stories, fairy tales we both loved, or snippets from the news that intrigued us. When the words stumbled, we laughed until our stomachs hurt, and I cherished the look in his eyes as they sparkled with shared discovery and patience. Our evenings were filled with light-hearted attempts at pronunciation, playful teasing when one of us would mix up words, and the comforting realization that no matter the language, love threaded itself seamlessly between us. As I lay in bed amidst the whispers of night, I smiled, feeling a warmth blanket around my heart. I had aimed for fluency, but what I had found was something richer, an intimacy forged through compassion and understanding. Each mistake became a stepping stone, revealing the path that lay not just to understanding German, but deeper connections that breathed life into our relationship. The journey of language became a metaphor for our love story, filled with missteps yet painted with the beauty of growth, both together and individually. And as I reached for Oliver's hand, I realized that love, like language, was a living, breathing entity, forever expanding, ever changing, but always anchored in the safety of shared affection.